Hello and welcome. My name is Stacy and I work as an evangelist for Indeed. That means I have this wonderful job of helping people to be as interested or as invested in a topic or subject matter as I am. And I'm really excited to talk to you about Time for Change, our new diversity, inclusion and belonging report. Feel free to drop your comments and questions into the chat where my team and I will be monitoring. I'm going to start the session actually with a sobering quote from Sangus Dayton, awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for his analysis of consumption, poverty and welfare. And he comments on a recent report released by the Institute of Fiscal Studies titled Dayton Review of Inequalities, of which of course he's the chairman. And he says, as the vaccine should at some point this year take us into a world largely free of pandemic, it is imperative to think about policies that will be needed to repair the damage and focus on those who have suffered the most. We need to build a country in which everyone feels that they belong. He continues on saying that there's a once in a generation opportunity to tackle the disadvantages faced by many that this pandemic has so devastatingly exposed. We now face a set of challenges that we cannot duck. The results of the report highlight the disproportionate impact of ethnic minority groups and deprived communities, and has also shown that the UK's best paid, most highly educated have been much better able to ride out the crisis. COVID-19 has forced massive behavioural changes on the global population. Over the past 12 months, we've had anti-racist protests under the umbrella of the BLM movement. Taking a knee has become a universally recognised symbol of solidarity. And like me, you might work, rest, and play in the same space day in and day out. Roll on the end of lockdown. In global events, change has also been afoot. Kamala Harris recently appointed as the United States' first female, first Asian American, and first African American vice president. Uncertainty around Brexit has been lessened, it's still present, and the COVID vaccines have really begun to roll out at a remarkable rate here in the UK. 2020 was a year like no other. The beginnings of 2021, very much the same. It's been a tough year and tough time all round. The uniqueness of the current set of circumstances that we have been and continue to be under is that nobody's immune. We've all been affected in some way. Nonetheless, some people have unfortunately been affected more than others. And in this session, I'll be sharing some key findings from our recent Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging report, with a focus on how a number of groups, often unaccounted for in studies in the UK, have been adversely affected by the pandemic, and how we as employees, employers and global citizens can continue to move the needle. Now, the bulk of research out there on DI&B was carried out during the past 5 years when economic conditions have been mostly favourable. Our report is underpinned by a UK-wide survey we conducted very recently. For all of the data geeks out there like myself, I've just put up the methodology that we use. So the survey from the 30th of October to the 3rd of November 2020 by opinion on behalf of us at Indeed, looking at 1,500 UK nationally representative adults. The survey comprised of 500 senior decision makers and 1,000 non-senior decision makers. A robust read on ethnicity, disability and sexuality. So let's get started. And we begin with some positive news. Overall, 89% of people told us DI&B in the workplace is important. With employees of bigger companies, those with 250 or more employees, more likely to agree it's important. Unsurprisingly, DI&B is most important to young people, 96% in fact of 18 to 24-year-olds. So if Gen Z is an important part of your workforce and DI&B isn't at the top of your agenda, it might be worth thinking again. Now, 7 in 10 workers would rate their organisation as excellent or good for their approach to diversity, inclusion and belonging, whereas only 5% would rate their organisation's approach as poor or very poor. It's worth me reminding you this data is UK focused. So for those of you managing multiple markets, you'll know yourselves how markets can differ hugely when it comes to diversity, inclusion and belonging. Over 2/3 of workers report their organisations having a clearly communicated vision and strategy around diversity, inclusion and belonging. That rises along with business size to 80% for employees in large businesses, compared to a slightly lower proportion of 57% for small businesses or those below 50 employees. Of those who say their business has a clearly communicated vision of DI&B, the vast majority, 94%, so they understand their company's specific policies on the topic, while a similarly high proportion, 85%, say their company's diversity policy is embedded into everyday working. And when we break down the results even further, we see that those at director level and above clearly feel the vision and strategy is communicated better than those below director level. So it really begs that question, are we giving the same level of attention to all employees? And even if you are those lower down the command maybe in need of increased engagement? Those two previous slides, they show us a DI&B vision and strategy to various degrees being communicated in large and small organisations. Yet, hiring apprentices boosts productivity, cultivates talent and builds a diverse workforce. But despite diversity and inclusion being the watchwords of good business, the proportion of apprentices from Black, Asian and minority ethnic or BAME communities remains low. Why does this gap in opportunity still persist? It's very clear. The percentage is extremely low. There's a gap, maybe even a chasm between communication and action when it comes to DI&B initiatives. Here you can see 25% of workers reported that colleagues making microaggressions made them feel excluded. That's where people are saying things they might deem as harmless, when in reality, they're quite the opposite. It shows the amount of ongoing education that employees need. Completing unconscious bias training or even getting top marks does not mean that staff are no longer unconsciously biased. It means we should be able to recognise that bias. And when it comes to recruiting new staff, over half of workers say their organisation has processes to ensure fair and objective recruitment. Again, if we break down the data further, we see it jumps to 65% for those at director level and above, but 45% for those below director level. Is there a parity in our processes for all? And if not, then why not? Is the worker on the shop floor less important than the finance director? Do we have to engage with different groups in different ways? Now, 2 in 5 workers with disabilities believe the shift towards remote working is going to have a positive impact on job opportunities for them. 57% of workers with disabilities say this is because remote working has made businesses realise it's not always necessary to have all of your employees all in the same building, all at the same time, while a similar proportion, 56%, believe businesses have realised that many tasks can be performed effectively from home. Now, interestingly, I spoke with the Indeed content marketing team as we were building out this presentation, and I thought the choice of imagery was interesting. We need to make sure we're also considering those living with a mental health condition and how they might be disproportionately impacted by being isolated at home away from colleagues. Remember, not all disabilities are going to be visible. And at a time when the Bank of England's chief economist has said that working from home is damaging Britain's creative potential, could harm personal well-being and the economy if it's maintained long after the coronavirus pandemic has receded, it leaves you with a lot to consider. 27%, so over a quarter of workers from minority ethnic groups, believe that the COVID-19 pandemic will have a disproportionately negative impact on job opportunities for all minority ethnic groups. We know from the data that in previous economic downturns, as well as the current one that we're in, minority ethnic groups tend to suffer most in the jobs market, most notably Black women when we think about the UK. And almost half of Black and mixed race workers feel they need to hide a part of themselves at work, whereas at total worker level, only 29% feel they need to hide any part of themselves, their personality, their personal identity from their colleagues at work. 45% of those with a physical condition, 44% with a mental condition, 44% of bisexuals, 41% of lesbian and gay workers. From personal experience, I know of colleagues who've actually changed the name they choose to go by at work because it becomes easier then to pronounce for their colleagues than their birth name might be. Over a third of workers believe COVID-19 has delayed efforts to improve DI&B in their company. Lots of projects you might have had planned maybe haven't been able to get off the ground as quickly as you would have liked. And when asked if their organisation could be doing more to improve diversity, inclusion and belonging, 43% of workers said yes, while 57% said no or were unsure, interestingly. Those more likely to say yes, my organisation has more to improve, are younger workers, 60% of workers in their 20s. Those from a minority background at 58%, and those who identify as LGB also at 58%. So with that in mind, and to quote McKinsey, as I often do when I'm talking about DI&B, over the past 5 years, the likelihood that diverse companies will out-earn their industry peers has grown. as we hopefully look to step out of the shadow of 2020 into a brighter 2021, is your company set up for success? If it isn't taking serious and addressing DI&B issues, you might just find things a bit tougher than they should be. So some fascinating and quite sobering points in there. The full report is actually 40 pages long. It dives a lot deeper into these stats and many more. I hope I've done it some justice in the kind of brief review that I've given you from it. There's also actionable advice and tips from top DI&B leaders, including our very own LaFawn Davis, one of my idols, and other influencers. If you want to download your free copy, all you need to do is visit the Discover space. There's a lot of insights in there available for you. Now, before this event, I reached out to my network on LinkedIn and beyond to get a feel for what DI&B questions were at the top of people's minds. Here, I'm going to do a quick deep dive into two related questions that seem to crop up a lot. If I've not been able to feature your question in this segment, I do apologise. If we have more time, I could go on forever. Please do follow up with me after the session and I'll be happy to help. So, first question. What are the best measures of success regarding addressing diversity, equity and inclusion in the workplace? That came in from Jamie Genge at the National Physical Laboratory. And it ties quite closely into the second question I received, this time from Rebecca Causey over at IBM, who says, most organisations measure the percentage representation of hires or employees. If there was a blue sky, what do you think should actually be important to measure in terms of diverse recruitment and the impact of a diverse workforce? I think success around diversity, equity and inclusion, as it's more commonly known, is usually measured around three pillars. That's attraction, retention and development. So in attraction, you're measuring your hires, where possible, break down the demographics. I don't think you're ever going to escape breaking down demographics, by the way. I think it's an important part of the work. By doing that, you're going to assess representational groups across different communities. It can't always be done due to legal issues, reporting restraints, the resources you have available, the systems that you have. But it's definitely something that can at least be explored by every single company, and I stand by that. When it comes to retention, the most important metrics are going to be looking at your employee engagement, performance metrics. Think about your inclusion resource group participation, trends in attrition across different groups maybe. And then with development, we would be looking at things like training completion or promotion slates. Think about your talent mapping. I don't think there's any one measure that you can rely on. That's not me sitting on the fence. I do think you have to take a holistic approach. And just kind of to dive into that bit a little bit more, there are benefits to measuring workforce demographics. It's going to help you uncover issues, for example, pay gaps. However, intersectionality is just as important, if not more important. It's great if you've set and achieved your gender goals. But if all of your women and your non-binary people sit in HR and marketing, you've clearly got more work to do. I know that those roles tend to be more female heavy, but what you often find in those departments is that where there are men present, they're tending to be paid more because they're in more senior roles. So a pay analysis by gender is crucial for those organisations as well. Also take into account tenure, because quite often you'll find maybe those men have had promotions recently while some of the women have been in role for longer, or therefore that's why they're earning similar to their male colleagues. But they've been doing the job longer, so it shouldn't be the case. Remember, gender is just one element. So when thinking about diversity, it's important to remember not only what's visible, like race and gender, but also what's non-visible, neurodiversity, hidden disability, sexual orientation. Finally, I hope you can tell that DI&B is a topic that's very close to my heart. I feel fortunate, indeed, strongly supports DI&B initiatives and gives speakers like myself a platform to discuss it. If any of the themes, the data insights or conversational points that I've discussed have sparked an interest, please do reach out to me either via LinkedIn or via Instagram. I'm still relatively early on my gram journey, so be patient with me. We can look to set up some time and discuss further. Thanks so much. We've got more breakout sessions to come. Don't miss Joe Wicks, the body coach, in his discussion on wellness. Enjoy the rest of Indeed Works.